Just Solutions. Welcome to Just Solutions from Free Speech TV, and today we are live in Pittsburgh, live from Netroots Nation 2022. And today we're going to be talking about how we vote, and our guest is Nathan Lockwood, who is the Executive Director of Rank the Vote. Nathan, thanks for being with us.
Pleasure to be here, mate.
Your organisation is all about ranked choice voting, which is in stark contrast to our current winner-takes-all system. So before we talk about exactly what ranked choice voting is it fair to say we have a winner-take-all system? How would you currently describe what we have in terms of elections?
Absolutely. It is a winner-take-all system, and it's also one where voters are limited to expressing support for only one candidate when they vote. We're also not guaranteed that even in that winner-take-all pick-one system, we're not guaranteed that the winner will have a majority of support. And in the cases where voters get choices and more than two candidates run, you can have winners with 20 or 30% support and not have an election that results in everyone clearly knowing who a majority of voters wanted to be the representative.
So how does our current system tie into a lot of the cynicism that we're seeing around elections, a lot of the attitudes that I'm going to vote against somebody as opposed to somebody who really reflects my values because I'm trying to be strategic in my vote? So instead of voting for the candidate that you really want to vote for, you're actually voting for somebody else.
Absolutely. You're right, because in our current system, in those moments where you have those multiple choices, maybe there is, a candidate that really speaks to you that you're excited about, but you have that strategic worry that if you actually vote for your favorite candidate, if they're not a front runner, you could actually be wasting your vote helping elect the candidate you agree with least. So folks are in many cases voting out of fear, and it's sort of a perpetuating cycle where people just have less and less confidence in the voting system.
I think we've had very, very high profile cases of that, of course, with Bernie Sanders as a candidate. But going back to Florida in 2000, when Ralph Nader was accused by so many people who still hold him responsible for George Bush's win in that presidential election because of such a narrow victory in Florida. But the reality was that many people just preferred Ralph Nader over Al Gore, but that has led to a fallout where people now feel there's no way I can vote for a candidate that I fully want to because I have to hedge my bets and vote against the worst candidate.
Exactly, and that's a perfect example of how our voting system is, first of all, it allowed Nader's participation to spoil that election, but secondly, the dynamics around it results in people not wanting to be Ralph Nader anymore, and thus denying us more perspectives and more choices of candidates in our elections.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. So it's not just the election itself, but it's the knock-on effect where people don't even want to participate because they're like, unless I fit into either of these two parties, there's no chance for me to ever get elected, certainly at a federal level.
Yep.
And so what does that mean for diversity of candidates and then diversity of representation?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the great thing about our country is in the last, 20, 30, 40 years, we have seen, some cultural advancement in terms of diversity. But at this point, our election system is holding us back from where we could be. And in fact, we see in places that have upgraded their voting systems to things, ranked choice voting, for example, that they are seeing more women winning office, more people of color, more people participating in elections with a broader range of ideas. So there's definitely an opportunity there to really allow our politics and our government to reflect the diversity that our culture is increasingly demanding.
Well, let's explain exactly what ranked choice voting is, because it's not as complicated as I think many people fear it to be. So what is it? Simple explanation.
Absolutely. So it's really appropriate to be talking about this on Free Speech TV because ranked choice voting is a simple upgrade to the way we vote. Instead of picking a single candidate, you are allowed as a voter to rank the candidates in the order you like them. So your favorite would be your first choice, your next preference, your second choice, etc. If your favorite doesn't have the support needed to win, your ballot counts for your next choice. You never have to worry about wasting your vote. And it takes that whole spoiler problem off the table. They can't blame Ralph Nader for running because Nader voters could vote Nader first and then pick Al Gore second. Or they could have voted for Ross Perot first and pushed George H.W. Bush second. So it gives free expression, that freedom at the ballot box for voters, and that freedom for candidates to run. And it makes it worthwhile for people who are engaged in politics, if they have a new body of ideas, to go ahead and form a new party. You won't be a spoiler. You'll be a new participant in a robust conversation.
I think many people would be surprised to know that it actually is happening in certain places. Certainly in municipalities, San Francisco has it in place.
Yep.
Cambridge, Massachusetts, I think was one of the first cities in the US, and very successfully, the New York mayoral election recently. And then certain states, like the state of Alaska and the state of Utah, it doesn't have a statewide in Utah, but it has a huge number of municipalities in Utah. Now, Alaska and Utah would be considered conservative states. So this really goes to the fact that this is a bipartisan concept. It's not favoring one particular party, it's just about favoring the voters.
That's a fantastic point, Maeve, and I think people in all different parts of the political spectrum are starting to discover that. I think progressives have seen the appeal for a long time. We're at Netroots today. I got involved in ranked choice after the 2016 presidential election, which happened to be right after Maine became the first U.S. state to win it for their elections, statewide, state and federal elections. And there was, amongst Democrats and progressives, with everything around the 2016 election, Hillary dealing with Jill Stein and Gary Johnson running, and then the acrimonious stuff in the primary with Sanders and Clinton, whereas Sanders could have run in the general with ranked choice and brought all that energy. The people who were sitting at home upset about the primary would have been out there voting for Sanders and probably ranking Hillary. So progressives have been early adopters, but the Republicans are getting on board too. Some of the biggest fans of ranked choice voting now are Virginia Republicans. They used ranked choice voting in their gubernatorial election, which they were pretty much locked out of power. The blue wave had enormous success in Virginia, and they're like, how do we win? They were looking at a big field of Republican candidates for governor, including a woman who had participated in the assault on the Capitol, and they're thinking, in this big crowded field, she could win with 25 or 30%, and that would not be a good look for us, and that would not win a statewide office. So they said, we're going to try that thing they're doing in Utah, and we're going to use that for our party primaries. And they used it, and it worked. It allowed them to get a candidate that their party could unify behind and go on to electoral success. And so this is Republicans are using it now in Virginia. They decided it worked so well there, they wanted to use it for their congressional election. So not a Republican thing, it's not a progressive thing, it's really good for everyone to feel like elections matter and that elections are about translating what individual people want to representatives that they feel confident representing.
We're in a very polarized time right now. There's a lot of extremism, are a lot of extreme candidates, and I know that ranked choice voting has been proven to be successful in other countries that have had very real conflict, and I'm talking about Northern Ireland. The Republic of Ireland itself has had ranked choice voting for more than a century, I think going back to 1919.
Yep.
But under the Good Friday Peace Agreement in Northern Ireland and the votes there, people were able to get on board in a cross-party, peaceful way because of the ability to use a system like ranked choice voting. I hope I'm not overstating the role of something like ranked choice voting in a very significant peace agreement, but talk a little bit about that, because many people feel we're in such a state of conflict right now that we're looking for solutions.
Doesn't everybody feel that way? We are in a state of conflict, and we all have our political perspectives that we feel strongly about, but we feel like, as different as the policy ideas, we shouldn't be angry at each other in the way we are. And I just think the example you made was so beautiful, like that they chose this election system. Can you pick an example? Northern Ireland, there were factions attacking each other and killing each other. So I think it's a wonderful example. Let's talk about what is it fundamentally about ranked choice voting that makes it a helpful thing for societies in conflict, societies with diversity where you need to bring people together. And what it is that it's that ranking process creates there's a couple pieces of it. There's a ranking process that creates an incentive for candidates. If you and I are competing in an election with a couple other folks, I want not only to have my supporters vote for me, but I want your supporters to pick me as your second and third choice. And so now the dynamic is flipped, because instead of me being a winning strategy for me to say how awful you are and how terrible a choice you would be to represent, our district or our constituency, I'm actually, because I want to win over your supporters to be my supporters as well, I'm going to say, I think you should vote for me first, but Maeve and I agree on environmental policy, and we agree that, we should be spending more on education, and we agree that it's time to, support the peace process in, the Congo or whatever it is we agree on. So totally different dynamic from this smash down the other side dynamic.
It seems that you could actually focus on policy, and you could focus on the issues and what's actually impacting people, as opposed to this polarized dynamic of my team or their team and the othering that is really so pervasive right now in our political system.
That's absolutely true. There are a couple other dynamics we could add to that. You mentioned Ireland, in Northern Ireland. So Ireland uses ranked choice voting in multi-member districts, meaning when, instead of having a geographic district have one representative, a geographic district has 3 or 4 or 5. And it eliminates the ability to gerrymander, which has become a problematic tool in American politics, also feeding into that polarization, because we know 85 to 90% of districts in the U.S. now are safe, and we can predict which party is going to win 98% of the time. And that's dangerous, because those parties don't need to appeal to the other side or people who see differently at all. They can go right for their base, and it just accelerates the separation that's hurting us.
I mean, this is what we've been touching on really essentially, is how this current winner-takes-all system is just quite detrimental to our democracy. I know there have been studies on that, and how ranked choice voting, as you mentioned earlier, can increase participation, so you will get more representation, more people will come on board. And I know that was a case recently, I think, was it in New York? There were some council votes or elections that we've seen more women. There's more gender parity when we have ranked choice voting. There are more people of color maybe represented.
Absolutely. Now, so that's a great example of New York and the power of, making the voting system more responsive and how quickly you can see change happen. In Northern Ireland, there were obviously a lot of changes going on. The voting system was one, and they were able to go from a very troubled situation to to get to a track to stability and peace much faster. In New York, there it was still winner-take-all elections, but with ranked choice voting. And even in winner-take-all elections with ranked choice, there are still significant benefits, including the civility benefit. But when you had, many women running, and you had some great civic organizations supporting women candidates and helping them compete, what you could do with ranked choice voting, they didn't have to worry if there were 2 or 3 women with different perspectives running for the same seat and fragmenting the pro-woman vote. You don't want to have to, if you, whatever group you are, you don't want to just have one woman run, because not all women think alike, so they could have multiple run and still without hurting each other's chances. In fact, they could help each other's chances. How transformative was this? Well, it was combined with other reforms which helped, like they had great campaign finance, they had a term limits thing which meant more open seats, and then ranked choice that allowed them to compete fully. But they went from 27% representation of women on New York City Council, or 27 or 28, to 61%. The first time women have represented a majority of the City Council. Can you imagine if we had a similar change in Congress? The number is roughly the same, about 27% women. That's worked for women. It's also worked well for in other places that have adopted ranked choice voting. for people of color. You see an increase of people of color running and winning office, and even there with winner-take-all elections with ranked choice voting, but still some really major benefits.
There was also the New York mayoral race, and there were some criticisms around that. There were some issues, and some people said, oh, that's got to be the ranked choice voting.
Yep.
But there were many other faults there. Talk a little bit about maybe some of the problems, or at least some of the problems that are being attributed to ranked choice voting, either fairly or unfairly.
There was, I would say, that was misallocation of blame in that case. So in terms of all the stuff in the headlines about some mistakes that happened, their board of elections is a body in New York City that doesn't have a fantastic reputation. It's an appointed body. It's widely believed that maybe a little bit too nepotistic in terms of how they're formed. They turned away help in terms of transitioning, in terms of expert support in running the system, and they made a very visible mistake where they took results from a system test and presented those as the preliminary results of the election. That was obviously a big mistake. That was actually the other issue was there was talks about the delay in the count, which was actually entirely due to not ranked choice, but rather the absentee ballot laws in New York, which were built for a time when absentee ballots were, where you had to request them and you needed to have, you needed a specific reason to be able to request them. This was an election held during the pandemic with more vote by mail historic, absolutely unseen participation of vote by mail. It went very well in the terms of people being able to vote and have their vote count, but New York State's rules prohibited those ballots from being counted for 2 weeks. So with that kind of volume, you can't call the election until those ballots are in. So there was a built-in delay from that. To its credit, the New York State legislature turned around and passed reforms to the vote by mail laws, immediately following that election.
Well, I'd like to talk about that in the counting of the ballots and how a ranked choice voting approach might make it a longer process, because you mentioned the delays in counting the ballots in the New York mayoral race.
Yes.
In the great state of Pennsylvania that we are speaking in right now at Netroots Nation, in the 2020 election, there were delays in counting because there were so many mail-in ballots, and the state legislature had not and still hasn't passed legislation to allow early tabulation.
Right.
The delay in then releasing the election results opened up a space for misinformation to go in and fester and just run rampant.
Right.
So is there a concern that introducing something that, we're not going to get immediate results, it's going to take longer to count these ballots, it's not just one box that's checked,
right,
that could further, create these problems because of the delays?
So it's certainly a concern that's worth exploring. What I would say is that in general, when there are delays, the delays attributable to ranked choice voting are of much smaller magnitude than these delays we saw with the mail-in ballots due to the legal issue. So in depending on the jurisdiction and the size and whatnot, you're talking about maybe a day or two delays. These are things with broader implementation that we are pretty confident are resolvable. They're resolving slowly because ranked choice voting is a relatively new phenomenon. There's 50 cities using it, which is a lot, but there's still a lot, it's still early going. And to its credit, places that adopt it are proceeding slowly in terms of being sure that as they're introducing ranked choice voting, they're maintaining all their security practices. So you could accelerate ranked choice voting counting and collecting of data from precincts using electronic transmission and whatnot, but that has to be approached with great care due to the paramount importance of security.
We also need a lot of voter education, because if the 2020 election taught us anything, and certainly January 6th taught us anything, there are a lot of people who just fundamentally don't even understand the election system that we have. And so if we were to introduce something that is a little bit different, albeit not incredibly complicated, that in and of itself is a barrier, because that would take an investment. I mean, I know New York invested several million into voter education, but that would be an element that would have to go in as well.
It's absolutely critical to the success of these, of ranked choice voting implementations that you have good voter education. Also, really effective education of the administrators. And so in the ranked choice voting movement nationally, there's organizations that are investing now in educating election administrators about how ranked choice voting works, even in advance of their states or cities adopting it, to sort of start that conversation. So admins, voters, and also candidates. So get folks, and Rank the Vote, we specialize in educating the voters so that in advance about the benefits of the system and how it works, so that they can get excited about it, which is what we find people do when they become aware of the opportunity.
I mean, this is something, it seems, that has huge potential to cut through a lot of the cynicism that people feel about, well, the voting system itself, but also the fact that even if you do cast a vote and the person that you elect or that you voted for gets into office, your issues are rarely represented, your communities don't have the real representation that you need. Money in politics is a huge issue as well. I mean, how would ranked choice voting maybe overcome some of that?
Yes, that's a great question. Well, one of the barriers right now for candidates who don't have as much money, who don't have as much name recognition, is that they're getting tuned out. New candidates get tuned out very early, first from donors and then from voters, because it's like it's not your turn. You can't. You have no chance against the similar established candidate. With ranked choice, you can throw your hat in. There's no harm in running. If you really catch on, people are going to invest with donations, and voters are more apt. They're going to more seek out to learn about you because they're not going to be worried about wasting your vote. That's one way. There's other kind of more kind of complicated reasons. Basically, ranked choice voting by allowing voters to get candidates they like. That's called accountability. That's what democracy is all about. And accountability means accountability to voters as opposed to accountability to special interests means that the people have more influence in the operation of their government than money. So it's really important in that regard as well.
Well, we just have a few minutes left, and I know your organization, Rank the Vote, is all about educating people on this particular issue. So what are the main misconceptions that you would like to clear up as, what you're hearing from people, the misconceptions and misunderstandings that you think people need to, get past and that you'd like to clarify?
Right. Well, I think the first thing is, thanks for having us on. You've helped us with our mission, which is first and foremost making people aware of ranked choice voting, what it is, the benefits, the opportunity. A second misconception is some people say, well, isn't that complicated? Aren't low information voters going to struggle with it? Isn't it going to privilege some voters over other? And we're happy to say because it's been used now in the U.S. for since 2005 in municipal elections, now statewide in Alaska for 2 cycles. Of course, it's been used in Australia and Ireland for 100 years. We have great data, and what the data shows is the more familiar with ranked choice voting voters are, the more they like it. They are able to use their ballots very effectively. They don't make errors at rates that are significantly different, in some cases lower than with standard ballots, and that all types of voters of all kinds of different groups are able to use it effectively and take advantage of the benefits it offers.
Well, as you said, the state of Maine, the state of Alaska have adopted them statewide. About 50 cities, 50 municipalities have it. But what is the national movement on this? Are there other cities, other communities trying to implement it? And what about at a federal level?
Sure, absolutely. So there's every cycle now, it's growing, and there's new municipalities. In this cycle, Fort Collins in the state of Colorado is a great ballot referendum, and a group that's done a great job engaging their community on the subject of ranked choice voting. Evanston, Illinois is going to have a ballot referendum. Ojai, California. I'm probably just forgetting a few right now, but there's a number of ballot initiatives. At the state level, Nevada has a ballot measure that would allow that would have them join Alaska and Maine in using ranked choice voting for state and federal elections. So that's what's going on this cycle. I think we're going to see that grow further. At the federal level, we think it's early days. We still have a lot of work to do in terms of educating and building the support. And these statewide and municipal wins, they help with that. The work we're doing to get people out into their communities talking about it helps with that. But there is a bill called the Fair Representation Act in Congress that would introduce ranked choice voting in multi-member districts to improve American. And they're educating Congress and their staffers now so that once the support nationally is there, we will have that solution ready to be passed in Congress.
Well, for anyone who's watching or listening right now and they're interested in this and trying to see how maybe their community can get involved, what would you suggest?
Absolutely. Well, definitely go to rankthevote.us, www.rankthevote.us. We have a place you can go and find the group that's working in your state to grow support for ranked choice voting, and you can click the link to not only sign up for Rank the Vote, but sign up for your state group as well. Get involved. If you don't have a lot of time, you can give money. If you don't have a lot of time, you can invite a speaker from that group to talk to your civic or political group, or come give a party for your friends and colleagues at your house. They'll give a 15 or 20 minute presentation. You can have them rank some ice cream or some beer, whatever you like. Everyone will have a good time.
And do you think now is the moment for something like this, something so transformative, because people are focusing so much on how we vote as much as who we vote for?
I think so. I mean, unfortunately, it's never been a better time because the problems of polarization, of gerrymandering, and of the government just not able to work effectively because it's so divided and so disconnected from what people want. These have never been more apparent. So it's people want to enjoy the freedom of having a responsive government, the freedom of having their votes count, and have the freedom to express themselves in a way they feel satisfying at the ballot box. So Maeve, I think you're right. The time is now.
Nathan Lockwood, Executive Director of Rank the Vote. Thank you for being our guest.
It's my pleasure, Maeve.
And you can find out a lot more at the website, rankthevote.us. Don't forget, find out all about us at freespeech.org. And stay tuned for a lot more coverage from Free Speech TV live at Netroots Nation 2022 at Pittsburgh.